Good evening. I never could have imagined that the devastating massacre of 1,200 innocent children and families on October 7 would less than 2 years later reward those who perpetrated it with symbolic statehood. But today, this is what we saw, with the Albanese government declaring it would vote to recognise a Palestinian state at the UN next month. Make no mistake, this is the Albanese government caving into the demands of bloodthirsty terrorists who call recognition the fruits, I quote, fruits of October 7. The Albanese government has sunk lower than we imagined by doing this before the hostages are home and while terrorists are calling the shots in Gaza. Today, the government even abandoned their own previous position that recognition would be dependent on the release of the hostages. I mean, how can they turn away from distressing images like this of the devastating plight of hostages Eviatar David and Rom Braslavsky, who are literally starving to death in war crimes taking place right before our eyes? In a despicable display of moral depravity, the Albanese government no longer demands their release or the other 50 hostages as a condition of recognition. Here was Australia's weakest ever Prime Minister making this announcement today.
Australia will recognise the right of the Palestinian people to a state of their own.
This cements the government as an ally to a terror-controlled hotspot whose very reason for being is to kill Jews and destroy Israel. And it cements the government's position as an enemy of the democratic state of Israel, where Jews and Muslim Arabs live together and govern side by side in Parliament. Albanese's press conference today was absurd, and it wasn't based on reality. It was fanciful. He claimed recognition would bring about peace and would even disarm Hamas.
This is an opportunity to isolate Hamas.
But he failed to outline precisely how Hamas would be disarmed, especially since he's also demanding Israel stop hunting down the terrorists. And shockingly, not one of the journalists present asked him this basic question: how does he propose Hamas will be disarmed and removed from power? No one asked it. What is wrong with the Canberra Press Gallery? Now, Albanese and Penny Wong claimed there were conditions on recognition. Not preconditions, of course, but future conditions, commitments. I mean, I've never heard such a twisted and flawed negotiating tactic. Now, while those commitments did not include the return of the hostages, they did include the Palestinian Authority promising to hold elections, pledging to stop funding terror, and recognising Israel's right to exist.
The Palestinian Authority has reaffirmed it recognises Israel's right to exist in peace and security. It has committed to demilitarise and to hold general elections.
Now, his argument is nonsensical for several reasons, and I'm going to go through them. Firstly, if these conditions are not met, and it's highly unlikely they ever will be, then Albanese and Penny Wong did not say that Australia would walk away from Palestinian recognition. So here was Penny Wong responding to precisely this question.
Just on, there's no situation in which we would revoke that recognition now that it's been...
Our expectation is the international community will work with all parties.
So as you heard there, Penny Wong was clearly asked if she would withdraw recognition if the conditions aren't met. And she didn't say recognition would be revoked. So there's no incentive for the Palestinians to give up their funding of terror. But it also means that these aren't really conditions at all if recognition isn't dependent on them. This is effectively unconditional recognition. Now, secondly, one of the supposed commitments extracted by Albanese from the Palestinian Authority is to hold elections. Yet if there are elections held in the West Bank, the likelihood is that the Palestinians would elect Hamas. And this is one of the reasons elections haven't been held in 20 years. Yes, 20 years. Because there'd be Hamas rule in the West Bank. Now, thirdly, even if the Palestinian Authority remained in control, this is also deeply problematic. It's an anti-Semitic regime where children are indoctrinated from birth to hate Israel. This message is reinforced by their schooling system and on state television. And the Palestinian Authority President, Mahmoud Abbas, has had a pay-for-slay policy where he's paid wounded terrorists and given a lifelong salary to families whose sons are killed during the act of terror. Now, we heard the Prime Minister today claim that Abbas has pledged to end this policy. Have a look.
It has pledged to abolish the system of payments to the families of prisoners and martyrs.
Note he says the word martyrs, not terrorists. But Albanese believes in the tooth fairy if he believes this, because look what Mahmoud Abbas has actually said on this topic. Just a short while after announcing the end of pay for slay, he said, and I quote, "If we have only a single penny left, it will go to the prisoners and the martyrs. They must receive everything they did in the past, and they are more honourable than all of us." And he went on. Yet this is who the Albanese government wants to run a new Palestinian state, a regime that has long funded and celebrated terrorism. Albanese also said that the United Nations first declared there should be a Palestinian state back in 1947.
This is the plan Australia was the first member of the United Nations to vote for back in 1947, when we proudly supported the creation of the modern State of Israel.
But in his delusion, he ignores what happened after that UN resolution, which is that the Palestinians rejected it entirely, and Israel was immediately attacked in what became known as the War of Independence. 5 Arab nations attacked Israel, and against the odds, the tiny Jewish state won and survived. But much of the land assigned to the Palestinians by the UN was then seized by Jordan, Egypt, or incorporated into Israel. And ever since that moment, the Palestinians have only rejected a two-state solution. This includes Bill Clinton's negotiations with Yasser Arafat at Camp David in 2000. Also, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert's offer to Mahmoud Abbas in 2008. Yes, the same Mahmoud Abbas who Albanese is now negotiating with has already rejected a Palestinian state that meant an Israeli one as well. And even in 2005, Israel withdrew from Gaza, allowing it to self-govern. And this only led to the bloodshed of October 7. And tens, if not hundreds, of billions of dollars in international aid was exploited and misused for terrorism. We now see a network of tunnels instead of a modern, sophisticated city. Now, Albanese should study this history. And if he did, he would know how unrealistic his claim is that recognition would magically lead to Hamas and other terrorists laying down arms. Yet that's what we heard repeatedly from both Albanese and Wong today, that recognition would lead to Hamas disarming and would bring about peace.
We have an opportunity as a nation to contribute to momentum towards two states, and that is the only prospect for peace.
The only prospect for peace. Albanese and Wong failed to outline how Hamas will be removed if Israel withdraws from Gaza, which is what they're insisting on. Will the Palestinian Authority fight Hamas militarily? No chance. So who will remove the terrorists? The French? The Canadians? Our Australian military? I mean, don't make me laugh. This is utter fantasy. And speaking of fantasy, Albanese today fulfilled his lifelong fantasy to recognise Palestine. This was a dream for him that began when he was a pro-Palestinian protester yelling into a megaphone outside the US Embassy in Sydney.
Children throwing rocks with helicopter gunships, with tanks and with missiles.
There were American and Israeli flags burned in that protest. And Albanese is still, to this day, that rabid activist. Only now he's dressed in an expensive suit and has the title Prime Minister. Albanese, as you know, was also the co-founder of the Labor Friends of Palestine group. He grossly misled Australians when he claimed he'd moved from the left of the Labor Party to the centre and adopted Australian values. I've said repeatedly it wasn't true, and now we are all seeing his true colours. And the reality is Albanese has taken Australian foreign policy into a dark and dangerous place. If you think I'm being dramatic, consider this. Albanese will meet with the corrupt anti-Semitic Palestinian leader Abbas before he's even met with the President of the United States. Trump was elected 9 months ago. 9 months. Not one meeting during that time. There is something seriously wrong in the state of Denmark when the Australian Prime Minister aligns himself with dictators like Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, a long funder of terrorism, and Chinese President Xi Jinping, but not with the United States. Albanese has abandoned our conventional Australian values that in the past saw us as a strong ally to America and Israel. And today was also a major slap in the face for Jewish Australians who've been repeatedly betrayed and abandoned by this pathetic government. The position of the Albanese government will only energise the worst elements in our society. It'll have a devastating impact in that it vindicates the aggressive protesters and makes life even less safe for us here in Australia. But Albanese has his head in the sand because he claimed today that we have a harmonious community.
They want a harmonious community, which is what we have.
This is a statement of grotesque denial. He viewed the Harbour Bridge rally as one of peace and humanity, instead of what it truly was, a defiling of our national icon with terrorist flags and Nazi symbols. Now, I've said it before, life for Jewish Australians is physically and emotionally unsafe under this morally corrupt government. And this is a serious situation for us in Australia. There's no sugarcoating it. We are living through dark and racist times. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu earlier today described Albanese's recognition of a Palestinian state as shameful. His comments coming several hours before the Prime Minister's press conference.
To have European countries and Australia march into that rabbit hole, just like that, fall right into it, and buy this canard is disappointing, and I think it's actually shameful.
And he's 100% right. This is not momentum towards peace, as Penny Wong claims. It's meaningless virtue signalling around the Middle East. And I say meaningless because the US will veto this move at the United Nations. So in Australia, we have a government that no longer sees eye to eye with Washington and has abandoned traditional Australian values, but has a warped ideology in line with the European left. In the future, when the political leadership changes from woke left governments in the UK, France, Canada and Australia, they'd likely take a different view on recognition. And that's certainly the case in Australia, where Coalition had this to say today.
Mr Albanese needs to clearly explain to the Australian people how his statements today do not risk rewarding and emboldening a terrorist organisation.
The risk here, Kieran, is that this is rewarding terrorists. This is a reward to Hamas for what they started on October 7. That sets a dreadful precedent.
So let's call this out for what it is. The Albanese government's position enables terrorism. Yes, they are terrorist enablers. Instead of putting pressure on Hamas to release the hostages and commit to a ceasefire, they're putting pressure on Israel to walk away and leave the terrorists in place. And they've given the Palestinians everything they want without them having to make any concessions to achieve peace. Hamas will now see no reason to stop their campaign of terror, because look what their murdering, killing spree of 1,200 babies, little children, young women, mothers and fathers has achieved for them. An historic reward by delusional Western governments at the United Nations. Their barbaric slaughter of the likes of the Bibas babies has been a diplomatic success. Shame on you, Albanese, and shame on you, Penny Wong.